Vijnanatmirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmritanjena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Dandavat pranams to all of our dear friends from around the world. I'm in Hungary now for a short visit. We had our summer festival. Madhusudana Maharaj, Devashish Prabhu came, and we had a beautiful Hungarian gathering, and traveling back to London day after tomorrow, and then I'll be going to Portugal not long after that. And normally this is our Q&A, but we're in the middle of a few important festivals. So I was thinking, unless anyone present has some burning topic that they'd like to discuss, then I was thinking that we can honor these special days that we're in the midst of at present. So if there's anything anyone particularly would like to discuss, please mention now, please speak or put in the chat. Otherwise, yesterday was the disappearance day of Śrīla Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur and also Gadadhar Pandit. Today is Gundicha Marjan, right? Is the day of cleansing the Lord's temple. And then tomorrow is Ratha Yatra, huge festival day in India. So where do we start? We'll go in chronological order, I suppose, for the sake of simplicity. So Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur, yesterday, he is someone who is very close to us, actually, because he is like a great grandfather to all of us, and we can think of him as the founding father. Some of you may have seen a short article I published yesterday on Facebook. Although perhaps that expression, it may have other connotations which others don't appreciate. Perhaps, I don't know. I'm not very good with history, but within our family, we can think of him in that way. We can make our own connotation for that. That in the sense of, for the modern movement of Krishna consciousness, he was the original pioneer and visionary who began this whole movement that we're a part of today. Krishna consciousness as we know it and as we practice it, as we conceive of it, it all, you could say in a sense, it was the brainchild of Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur. Or to be more precise, you could say the seeds of this were planted by Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur. And it was his son, Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who nourished that seed and grew it into a beautiful blossoming plant. And from that, you could say, also came the flowers of our Gurudev, Śrīla Govinda Maharaj, Param Gurudev, Śrīla Sridhar Maharaj, and Śrīla Swami Maharaj Prabhupada also, who in more recent times have spread this widely all over the world, particularly Śrīla Prabhupada, of course, Swami Maharaj. But Bhaktivinoda, if we go back, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he appeared in this world I forget the exact date of his birth, shame on me, but mid to late around mid 1800s, I think we can say, or going to late 1800s. Someone here maybe can correct me, tell me the exact date of his appearance. And his whole life is so extraordinary because and quite unique, right? At least within, relatively the modern era, relatively speaking, his example is very unique because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was someone who, he did everything, and, he was he had 13 children, he had a family man, he was married twice, he was a highly respected government magistrate who was very much appreciated by the British government, he was highly respected by his Bengali peers. Bengal, Kolkata was like a real hub at that time in India. I recently read one biography of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, And the one ISKCON devotee wrote it, I forget the name, but he was saying that Kolkata, he was drawing the whole background of Bhaktivinoda Thakur beginning his preaching. And he said in there that Kolkata, oh, thank you, Anand Krishna, 1838. Okay, so that's more or less early 1800s. September 2nd, 1838, he appeared, departed 1914. But he, in this biography of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, this devotee mentioned that Kolkata was like the second most important city within the British Empire at that time, right? The British Empire was comprised of so many countries around the world at that time, right? But Kolkata was second only to London in terms of its importance and attraction. It was a real cultural hub. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur was someone who was well known and highly respected within, the educated, very cultured section of society. He was very good friends with, some of you may have heard of Rabindranath Tagore, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and who was a Bengali gentleman. But he had a brother who was very close with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And so this was the kind of circle that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was moving in. And as I said, like touching upon all worlds. He was a family man. He was a successful magistrate, working for the government and so on. And part of this whole educated section of society, educated, respected section of society, but in the midst of all of that, he maintained his own integrity as a devotee of Mahaprabhu and represented that with great dignity. And one interesting point that was made in this biography was because someone might question, but because you hear some stories, like the editor of a major newspaper, he highly respected Bhaktivinoda, would turn to him for advice, and someone may ask, why is he not as famous as some of his peers are today? Why is Bhaktivinoda Thakur still somewhat unknown within a wider circle? And it was explained because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was so, although he mixed with all these people, he also was very careful in what he would directly participate in, what type of discussion he would get involved in. And he only would become engaged with things that were strictly of a spiritual nature. He didn't engage with, politics and general cultural matters of the day, but he was very much focused on his own, spiritual discussion, presentation, and so on. And so because he didn't engage in like the wider discourse of the time, that may be why he's not as well known as some others are of that era. But then, so the other thing that's very special about Bhaktivinoda Thakur is that he had this whole journey in showing how he came to embrace the path of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Of course, from our perspective, we see him as an eternal associate of the Lord, Nitya Siddha Vaishnava, who descended from Goloka Vrindavan in order to spread the Lord's message. That is the vision that we have of him. But at the same time, in order to, you can say, for the purpose of instructing others, in his life, he showed this beautiful example of making some serious research and study of different philosophies, including Christianity, and other conceptions, and then showed how at the conclusion of this like serious study, becoming involved in different groups, making comparative analysis of different philosophies, at the conclusion of all this, he came to understand that the prema dharma, the religion of divine love that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was spreading in this world, as corroborated by the ancient scripture Srimad Bhagavatam. Sorry, Ananda, could you just watch out for some of the mics? They go on and off, and yeah, if you could just watch out for that, thank you. So then he finally came to embrace Mahaprabhu's conception as the most developed. And then he also expressed some doubt, right? Like also we can think of Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. Sometimes the Lord uses his beloved devotees to help others, right? He's putting them in a position of doubt. They're expressing a position of doubt in order to help others who may also have those same questions, right? So we see at different times in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is asking some questions for the sake of ourselves, right? And so similarly, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, of course, this is also Leela, this is also divine play. So Bhaktivinoda is also not necessarily aware of his own position and what he's participating in. But this is part of the Lord's Leela in this world. But he also expressed doubt, and for example, at a certain point, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he expressed, yes, I'm fully embracing the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the message of Srimad Bhagavat, but this Krishna, I'm not so sure about him. This Krishna, he's a womanizer, he's a thief. Like how can I accept that he is the supreme entity? He expressed some doubt about that. And then this is found in some of his writings. But in his prayer and his meditation, he came to this conclusion that, actually, Lord Chaitanya, who was a strict, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu lived as a very strict sannyasi, wouldn't even hear the name of a woman, following the convention of the time. So Bhaktivinoda came to the conclusion that actually Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna, right? And coming to demonstrate what is the purity and the dignity of Krishna's pastimes. They cannot be compared with anything of this world, although apparently they may look the same, right? And so like this, Bhaktivinoda Thakur showed this whole journey in coming to Mahaprabhu's, it wasn't like in a very quick way or easy way, sentimental way, he took this up, but in this very serious way, making serious research, comparison, etc. And then he did everything for us, actually. I sometimes remember one statement that Goswami Maharaj, one of our sannyasis, made. He said, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is God as far as we're concerned. Like everything we have has come from him. There's a beautiful verse that Srila Sridhar Maharaj composed where he's summarizing all the contributions of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Guru, and basically everything. Without that, we wouldn't have anything. But he's saying everything that he gave: Guru Dam, Grantadam, Gaur Damadam, Namadam, Bhaktidam, Buddhidam, Vande Bhaktivinoda Kamsadam. And so he's listing here, first of all, he gave us our guru, right, who in the form of his own son, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because at a certain point, Bhaktivinoda Thakur realized that he needed help. He had this whole vision. He composed endless texts, over 100 different books, songs, poems, articles, in so many different languages. He was so learned, Urdu, Persian, Sanskrit, Hindi, English. He was publishing in all these different languages, giving public lectures and so on. And so many other things he did, which we'll come to. But at a certain point, he realized that I need somebody else to really turn this into a movement, right? It was as if he was laying the groundwork, preparing the ground, but he needed someone to pick that up and actually create a movement that persons could become a part of. And and he was tied down. He was like a part of society. But to really start a movement, you need a revolution. You need someone who's standing on their own, who's going to create something, right? But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was very much a part of the existing society, right? Part of the government, has his big family to take care of and so on. And persons have a particular view of him, right? And so in the same way, and Gurudev made a very nice analogy with Veda Vyas, right? The sage, Krishna Dvaipaya and Veda Vyas, how he'd compiled all the scriptures. He'd finally presented Srimad Bhagavatam, the crown jewel of all the Vedic texts. But then he also realized, I'm not the right person to actually present this to the world, but I need somebody else. And then he realized that his own son, Shukadev, he was the one. And so similarly, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was looking at everything he'd done and came to that point of realizing, oh, I need someone else to pick this up, right? And make something with it and create a movement. And we hear that he made this earnest appeal to the Lord, please send one of your own to help me, to move this forward. And in response to that prayer, the Lord sent Śrīla Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur as his own son, right? And so then it was Saraswati Thakur who established this glorious mission of the Gaudiya Math and created, a systemized practice which we are still a part of today, right? And the Saraswati Thakur who established, how we practically apply Krishna consciousness in the modern age, right? So Gurudam, this is the verse of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Gurudam, he gave us our guru. Like, what's more important than that, right? Gurudam, Grantadam, he gave us scripture, right? He gave scripture in the form of his own writing, of course. And there were also texts there were some important texts which had become lost or were not so well known, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur revived them. The Upadeshamrita, a very important text of Rupa Goswami, that was one of them, one of those important texts. This Upadeshamrita, some of you will know, is the nectar of instruction, which it's a very concise text. It's only 11 or so verses, but everything's in there. It's very important for us. And this, I don't remember the details of the story. Someone may remember better. But it was something like he like accidentally came across a copy that was in someone's attic somewhere or something like that. Like it had been kind of lost. And he managed to come across or find this copy, and then he republished that, right, and distributed it. He also wrote some very valuable commentaries on Chaitanya Charitamrita and other texts. And then he also, this was a point our Gurudev made, that he had this incredible capacity to speak to everyone and to every audience. And so, we like in our daily temple programs, most of the songs we sing are his. And they're actually, of course, for those who don't know Bengali, it may look a little intimidating. But if you know a little Bengali, they're like simple, sweet village songs. I mean, that's the style of them. Of course, the content can be quite heavy at times, but the style of the songs is simple, sweet. Like in every world tradition, right? There's some culture of getting together and singing, right? And in this very organic way. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote these songs for that type of group, right? And and this is actually a very powerful way to keep a message alive through simple song. You're going about your daily activity. Again, it's not our language, so but think of the equivalent, some like modern pop songs, right? People are singing them all the time, and nowadays, playing them in shops and so on. So similarly, village life in Bengal, people are going to be singing these songs as they're washing their laundry, cooking lunch and so on, right? It's just like a very organic way to keep a message alive, right? And what are these songs? They're about Mahaprabhu, about Nityananda Prabhu, glorifying Guru, Vaishnav, Radha Krishna, and so on, right? So that was another very, sweet and accessible way in which Bhaktivinoda Thakur spread his message through simple, sweet song. Um, then he also wrote, some very serious theological texts. Um, and there's Krishna Samhita and others. And Gurudev also pointed out, like, how he could speak to the Western minded person who likes very, rational, systematic, scientific presentation. And he mentioned Chaitanya Shikshamrita as one example of that. Then he could also speak to the Vedic, more traditional Vedic, Indian, Eastern mentality. And he mentioned Jaiva Dharma, that's one of his more famous texts. So he had this a bit, and some of his poems, you won't believe they were written by a Bengali man. Like he has some poems that are written in I suppose like Victorian style English. And you'll think they were written by an upper class gentleman in England, right? But no, it's written by a Bengali man. It would be difficult to believe, right? So he had this incredible capacity to speak to everyone, and it's so merciful. It is his extreme mercy. Gurudev, many times I heard him refer to the melted heart of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And okay, Marie has a nice comment here. His poetry is very reminiscent of the hymns. That's right. They're actually Christian style, aren't they? Is very reminiscent of the hymns of the late 18th and early 19th century in England. There you go, spoken by a Christian theologian. There you go. Perfect evidence. Thank you very much, Marie. I mean, like, come on. Like, and then at the same time, he's writing, Bengali, simple Bengali, like folk song style. And then also writing these serious philosophical texts. I mean, it's just, this is not a human's capacity. Wow, Marie says almost can't tell the difference between his stuff and Charles Wesley's. Wow. Well, that's a big statement. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. So Gurudam Grantadam, he gave us Guru, he gave us scripture, Gurudhamadam. This was another very important contribution of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that he revealed the birthplace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which had become lost. Why? Because the river Ganges is always moving, right? And there are different holy sites connected with Mahaprabhu's pastimes on either side of the Ganga. And so when the Ganga moves, certain areas will get washed over and forgotten about. And so in the course of all this, the exact place of Mahaprabhu's birth had become lost. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he went to so much trouble, so much endeavor to perfectly identify, what was the exact birthplace of Mahaprabhu. He as we said, right, he worked for the government, so he had access to old historical records and maps, and so he was researching in that, speaking amongst locals, and he also had this vision, right, when he was staying in Godrumadweep, right, and looking across to the island of Mayapur. He had this vision of a glowing city, right? So this was a huge endeavor for him, to identify exactly where the birthplace was, and finally there was this one area. It was an area that he saw it was covered in tulasi plants, and the local people told him, well, nothing else will grow here. Only tulasi grows here. And that, and then he squared that off with all of his other research, and he came to that conclusion, oh, this is the place under the neem tree, right? And still you can go and see that holy place today. Sarsi Thakur established a beautiful temple there. And then finally, as the icing on the cake, you could say, he invited many important, prominent, and authentic also sadhus to come and verify that because that's actually a very nice thing to observe that in spite like he already made all this research. It was already pretty much clear this is the place. But what's the final thing? Hridayena Byanugyato, the heart knows, right? So what kind of heart? The pure heart. So finally, he invites important Vaishnavas of the day to come and feel in their heart's resonance. Oh, this is the place, right? And then we hear that Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj, who was one of only a very few Babajis who were like recognized and honored as genuine by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He's on our Guru Parampara also, of course. So he was like, I don't know, maybe 100 and something at the time. He lived to like 120 or something like that. And he had this servitor companion, Bihari, who was very strong. And Jagannath Das Babaji, so old at that time, crippled, being carried in a basket by his very strong servitor, Bihari. But we hear when he arrived to that place, Bihari's holding in this basket on his head. He, feeling the vibration of that place, he leapt out and started dancing, on that soil. And so that was the final confirmation that, oh, yes, this is the place, right? And then Bhaktivinoda also established a committee in order to, to protect, to maintain, and develop that place, and also the whole of Goramandal, right? The place of Sri Navadvip Dham, the place of Mahaprabhu's pastimes. He also gave us. There was also he at one point he was collecting some money. He made this committee and he wanted to collect money in order to, do many things to clean up the dam, and so on. And there was one statement that he made that if necessary, he was ready to go door to door himself, right? And I can't say exactly how old he was at that time, but he would have been a little elderly at that time. And he, he's this very respected government magistrate, quite well known in that whole region. And there was one newspaper that was so charmed, and they published that, like Bhaktivinoda himself, he was ready to go door to door if necessary to collect the needed funds to establish this holy place and to protect and maintain the dam and so on. They were so impressed by that and charmed by that. They published that in their newspaper. It may have been the Amrita Bazar Patrika, but there was one newspaper they published that. So, but then on top of all of that, he had this whole inner heart revelation of all of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes within the holy Dham of Navadvip, and he gave us this very important book, Navadvip Dham Mahatmya. And in his like heart's vision, he's seeing how Nityananda Prabhu had personally taken Jiva Goswami throughout all the islands of Navadvip, and telling him the importance of all these different places, right? This is Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur. This isn't something he's conjuring up in his imagination, but that's the type of Vaishnava he is, that he's having that direct darshan, that live stream, because it is not a matter of history, right? It's not like, oh, on this date and so on, this happened. But these are all like live streams of revelation that are eternally flowing. And so he's having that revelation of Nityananda Prabhu taking Jiva Goswami, around the Dham, place by place, and personally showing him and speaking to him about the glories of Navadvip. And then Bhaktivinoda is having that vision, and then presenting that in beautiful, charming Bengali poetry in Navadip Mahatma and Navadip Bhava Taranga. So that's another important contribution of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So Gaur Dhamadam, he gave us the Dham, he gave us Gaur Dham, the place of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. So, who is Bhaktivinoda Thakur, So then Gaur Dhamadam, Bhakti Dham, he gave devotion, right? He gave bhakti. What does that mean? Obviously everyone knows about bhakti. The scriptures are speaking about bhakti. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur clarified what is pure devotion. Yes, many people are talking about bhakti and supposedly practicing, but there are different types of bhakti. There are mixed versions. But what is the conception of pure devotion, right? What was also discussed by Rupa Goswami, right, in his writings, and what Mahaprabhu wants to give to this world. Because, this is another point which we didn't touch upon yet. But, one of the issues that Bhaktivinoda Thakur faced when he came to that moment, oh, this is it, right? The message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is it. This is the answer. And, he was so excited. And then he looked around, almost like I've heard some devotees share their stories, throughout their early life, they're desperately searching, and then they find, oh, this is it. And then they go and tell their family or their friends, and they just get blank stares, So Bhaktivinoda Thakur had his moment like that. But of course, at that time, the situation was much, much more serious, because he looked around and he saw it was a desert. Not only was it a desert, worse than that, there were so many groups that were misrepresenting who Mahaprabhu is, right? And doing all kinds of strange and degraded or prejudiced things. There was a whole spectrum of misrepresentation, right, in the name of Mahaprabhu. And we hear of that one scholar who he made a precise list of 13 different groups who were calling themselves followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but were actually misrepresenting him in many different ways, right? There were some who, they all had different issues, just for a few example. One group, they're known as Jati Gosais, and they put a lot of importance on bloodline, right? And so, let's say you're born in a Brahmin family, or particularly there were those who, and this is still continuing today, there's a whole lineage coming from Advaita Acharya's family members, right? There's a lineage coming from Nityananda Prabhu's family members. And so different associates of Mahaprabhu, their bloodline is continuing. And so there were those who would worship those persons and put a lot of emphasis on bloodline and birth and status, and then dismiss those who may have genuine spiritual quality, but are of a lower, so-called lower birth, right? So that was one issue. And then more serious were those who were mixing Mahaprabhu's teachings into, strange, dark, tantric practices. There were those, there were many who would, take the name of Mahaprabhu, chant the Maha Mantra, but they might be, smoking ganja, at midnight, and having their gathering, So what was the result of that? That, respectable persons, there were many of them who dismissed the followers of Mahaprabhu. And because, you see, one issue with Mahaprabhu's message is it's all-inclusive, right? And so that, all-inclusive means all-inclusive, right? And so it's easy for that type of atmosphere to turn into a free-for-all, right? Anything goes, it's all about peace and love and so on, right? So this was the situation that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was facing. He also saw some of the important books were missing. There was also a very prejudiced idea about Srimad Bhagavatam that he came across. He speaks about that also. And so it was like he realized, oh, I've got some work to do. I've got some work to do. This is a lot of work. Um, and so, oh yeah, so going back to Srila Srinamar's verse, Namadam, he gave the name. So he gave the concept. Oh, no, we were on Bhakti, sorry. He gave the conception of pure devotion. What is the clean and pure message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotion. And then also Namadam, the same thing, the name. He gave the conception of the pure name. Is the name, and this is something Srila Sridhar discusses a lot. Is the name just a mundane vibration that we can chant with our mundane tongues? No, the holy name is a purely spiritual vibration that descends from above. We can't just produce that with material syllables with our tongue, right? But it's a descending process. So then what's necessary? We need to cultivate a whole state of being and consciousness, purify our heart, and invite that holy name to descend, right? And so then, I don't know how widely known it was, but I believe it's the Padma Purana, but one of the ancient Vedic texts, there are these 10 offenses to the holy name, which, give some guidelines, like how can we cultivate this clean heart from which we can invite that holy name to descend and appear, right? So, in all these different ways, Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākur, he made this, huge effort and huge contribution for our sake, right? And then we also hear that he made this prediction, right? That, what was it exactly? He said, like, within 50 years, right? We'll see, our Western brothers and sisters coming here and chanting the holy names, Jai Sachinandan, Jai Gaur Hari. He made this kind of prediction. Very soon we will see that happen. He made that prediction, and our Gurudev, he commented that when he first joined his Guru Maharaj's mission, Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Math, he heard this prediction. And he was thinking, oh, yes, the scriptures, they say lots of things. And it, no doubt it will happen very, very far from now. But within 50 years, that seems a little too much, But our Gurudev was very happy to be proven wrong, And then he spoke of how he became a witness of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prediction, right, coming true. So our Guru, and there's another very important point about Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākur I think about sometimes. Our Gurudev, Srila Govinda Maharaj, he made this point that it's very interesting that Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākur, in his preaching, and as we've just been discussing, right, Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākur was very broad, extremely broad, and he was very generous, very magnanimous. You look at the style of a lot of his writings, and he's very inclusive. He honors all faiths and so on, and he would meet with many different kinds of persons. He's moving in the world as a member of the world, preaching, as we said, to so many different types of persons. So he was extremely broad in his preaching, very accommodating. But then our Gurudev made this interesting point. At the same time, his own inner cultivation was very, very refined, right? And in particular, his here it is. Nanda Krishna shared this quote. Very nice. The day is not far when the fortunate souls of Europe, America, Russia, and other countries will, with pure hearts, chant Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda, and roam around the streets of their cities and towns, dancing in ecstasy. Jai Hari Bol. So this was the point our Gurudev made. He was broad in his preaching, but in his inner world of bhajan, his own inner devotional world, he was very exclusive and very refined in his cultivation. And we hear that his Ishta Devata. Ishta Devata means one's most cherished deity, one's like preferred and most beloved deity of worship. What was that deity for him? It was Gaur Gadadhar, right? And and it's also interesting, right? As we mentioned, Bhaktivinod left on the same day that Gadadhar Pandit left the world, right? That was yesterday. So he had this deep affinity for Gorg, this special type of worship of Gaur Gadadhar. It's a very exclusive type of worship, which we kind of, we've been advised to like give our respects to that. We don't directly approach that kind of worship because it's difficult for us to really conceive, right? Because it requires a very deep, fine feeling and understanding. Why? Because so what is this? So Gaur Gadadhar, and there's only a few deities that you'll find where they are worshipped together, Mahaprabhu and Gadadhar Pandit. I think there are four that we hear of, four deities of Gaur Gadadhar. But so where you see them both being worshipped together. So who is Gadadhar? Right? Gadadhar Pandit ultimately represents Radharani, right? And Gadadhar Pandit is the avatar of Srimati Radharani in Gaura Leela. Who is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Krishna seeking out himself in the mood of Radharani, right? It's like, whoa, whoa, like what is that? And then one way Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains the position of Gadadhar is he says, after Krishna takes the heart of Radharani, what's left over is Gadadhar Pandit, right? That's one way Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains the position of Gadadhar. And there's one article, I don't remember if it was Srila Sridhar Maharaj or Gurudev's article, but saying that Gadadhar is like someone who's just had their greatest wealth stolen. And what do you do? Like if someone's coming and taking your jewel, you go running after them. And so it was, maybe Srila Sridhar Maharaj, said that Gadadhar's position is like that. Like Krishna's taken his heart. He wants to try it out for himself. And then Gadadhar's like, oh, hang on, you just took my greatest wealth, right? Of course, this is also Leela, and and it's not that Radharani is trying to stop him. Obviously, she's also embracing this new Leela, but there's also an aspect of that, like, oh, well, hang on, you took my greatest treasure. And so Gadadhar, he was described as like a shadow, like he was always like a shadow. Gurudev spoke of him like that, like Gadadhar was always like a shadow of Mahaprabhu and couldn't live without him, always liked to stay very close to him because he's got his own wealth, right? So it's a very tricky conception, this conception of worshiping Gaur Gadadhar together, because in a sense they're Radha and Krishna, but at the same time not exactly, right? And Radha and Krishna, they have this relationship as lovers, but you can't say that Gaur Gadadhar's mood is like that. It's different. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Srila Sridhar Maharaj wrote this extraordinary article about Gadadhar Pandit. This is a different one from the one I just mentioned. But he gave this analogy of like a husband who's preparing to do puja, right, in their family temple. The husband's preparing to do the puja. Traditionally, it would be the men, right? And his wife is beside him, assisting him, right? Collecting ingredients and, helping him on the side. And so Srila Sridhar Maharaj used this analogy to illustrate something, to give us some idea, what is the relationship of Gaur Gadadhar? It's not that they're focused on this relationship of lovers with one another, but they're actually focused on the worship of Krishna. So it's a very tricky conception. As I said, it's one that we give our dandavat to from a distance. We can't, it's difficult for us to, and it would be very easy for us to get some twisted idea of what their relationship is. There was one time, some of you know our temple in Navadvip, right? We have in the middle of the Kunda, the lake, this Govinda Kund, we have that beautiful temple in the middle of the lake. And when that temple was being built, our Gurudev was contemplating, oh, what type of worship will we do there? And somebody suggested, oh, what about Gaur Gadadhar? Have deities of Gaur Gadadhar there. And our Gurudev answered by saying, that is the private chamber of bhajan of Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur. Like, that's the worship of Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur. Like, we are not qualified for that, right? So it's a very, very interesting point that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as we're saying, was so broad in his presentation of Krishna consciousness, but he himself had his own very deep, profound inner worlds that was very, very exclusive and very refined and very elevated, right? And he had deities of Gaur Gadadhar you can still see today in the island of Godrumadweep. So it's a very wonderful thing to honor and to appreciate in Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but it's also very instructive for us, isn't it? That we may adopt different means to present Krishna consciousness, and for example, very commonly, persons may be, like I think Banavi is with us today, right? She's a yoga teacher, and she's also using that platform at times to share Krishna consciousness, right? So there are many examples like that. There may be different things of this world that we'll use as a tool to make Krishna consciousness more accessible, right? But at the same time, we don't want to become victims of our own propaganda, right? We may simplify things in order to present to others, but we also need to keep that internal state of refining and going deeper and culturing our own understanding, right? And although we may be simplifying to others at times, we want to be deepening within our own heart and within our own consciousness, going to some deeper conception and feeling and experience of what this is. And, if we want to keep our own integrity as authentic practitioners of Krishna consciousness, this is an important reflection, right? Because it's very easy, if we are, to become a bit, relaxed about all that, and we're sharing this in a simplified way, and then we forget, our own inner fire, right? We have to stoke our own fire. That's very important for our own integrity as aspiring members of Mahaprabhu's movement and family, right? So the example of Bhaktivinoda Thakur is very wonderful in that regard, because the disparity between the two is so big, right? Who he was in the world and moving in the world as he was and speaking to all these different kinds of people as he did, but then he had this whole inner world that that who else could really appreciate, because it was so profound, right? And then finally, in his last days, Bhaktivinoda Thakur left everything behind. He took Babaji, actually, and you'll see some pictures of him in this simple white cloth. And then in the last period of his life, a few years or so, he was living, as a Babaji in a very solitary way, simple way, in his mood of devotion. We hear that he actually, in the very last period, he actually went into a state of samadhi, this ecstatic trance, the last few months of his life. A nice comment from Marie here. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing, right? Every spiritual practitioner needs to reflect on that, keeping our own inner authenticity, right? Um, but yeah, and so then there was this period before where he gave up his job, of course, withdrew from his family life, and there's one story I wanted to share that because this was something that created a bit of a stir, right? This somewhat famous. He was fairly famous in his time in that area around Kolkata, West Bengal. You know, he very respected, well-known magistrate, intellectual, and so on. Just withdrew to become a Hare Krishna, right? Like it created a stir, you know, and just living this very simple sadhu life, right? Chanting, taking the name. And you know, it was, you know, it was something that caught people's attention. And we hear at one time there were these, I think he was maybe living in Tarkeshwar at that time, this one city in Bengal. And there was this group of young men. They were like, you know, like maybe they were still at college, but you know, lawyers, you know, professionals, and you know, they were so curious about this. Like, who is this Bhakti Vinod? Like, he was this, you know, he would have been kind of like a legendary figure for them. This brilliant man composed all these books and had this high position in society and then he's just like, you know, gone to live in a little hut somewhere, right? And so they actually traveled. They were living in Kolkata. I don't know, like three, four, five of them, something like that. And they came to search him out and like to ask him, like, what's this all about? You know, who are you? And they so they found him. I think it was in Tarakeshwar he was at that time. And they he received them and they started asking him questions and um and they asked him something about Krishna, like, oh, can you tell us about Krishna? Something very simple like that. And he was at this phase in his life where he was, you know, withdrawing more into his own inner mood, you know, withdrawing from being that public figure and preacher and so on. And so he was, you know, much more open and, you know, more close to his own feelings and pride, what might normally be more private to him. He was in this space of being like less able to keep that private, right? And so we hear that just hearing that question, he went into this trance and he started showing all these ecstatic symptoms and he kept saying to them, "Oh, you're so fortunate. You want to hear about Krishna. You want to hear the name of Krishna. How blessed you are, you know, just to have that desire and went into this whole state of ecstasy, right? Then later he also spent some of his last time in Puri, and I don't remember exactly where he left the world. Maybe someone here can say, but we don't want to think too much about that sad part. Um, But you know, so this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur, you know, we owe him everything. And you know, and then as we said, he gave the person to continue this mission, right? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who created the whole movement that we're part of today. So we are so indebted to him. You know, I mean, there's so much that we could say. He only slept, you know, a few hours. I mean, if you look at it's published, you can find it, you can Google it, his daily schedule, because he was working. He was working full time as a government magistrate, had this big family to take care of, 13 kids. I mean, for goodness sake, can you imagine that coming home to 13 children? After a day at work. Then he's working into the hour he's doing because he's doing his writing, right? Then he's working into like late hours of the night. Slept what, like 3 hours or something? Maybe someone here can say exactly. Slept something like 3 hours a night, 4 hours maximum. this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I mean, he is extraordinary. He is extraordinary. And Srila Maharaj mentioned, like, of course, we said in the beginning, right, we consider him as a Nitya Siddha Vaishnava, not someone who, because he shows this pastime of coming to Krishna consciousness, but Srila Maharaj mentioned, if you look at the depth of his devotion, his understanding, and the huge amount of accomplishments, his vast accomplishments. That's not, Srila Sridhar said, that is not something that a human can do. For him to have that level of feeling, that's also not human. That's not something that someone could acquire in one lifetime. Those were his words. Someone could not acquire that in one lifetime, right? So now we're coming to the end of our time. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he is everything to us, and his divine wave continues in this world today. We're singing his songs every day. We're so blessed to be a part, of what was his merciful vision of Krishna consciousness in this world, in this age. So we're so indebted to Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Today, we're kind of out of time, but we'll just briefly mention, right, today, as I said in the beginning, it is also Gundicha Marjan, cleaning the temple, preparing to receive the Lord. And this is representing this. There's a whole chapter in Chaitanya Charitamrita discussing this, and how this is representing how we clean our heart, right? And this is also in line with what we're discussing about Bhaktivinoda Thakur's presentation, right? We're inviting the Lord into our heart, but first we need to make a nice sitting place, right? Clean the area, right? And so this is illustrated very beautifully in the whole Ratha Yatra Leela, right? And so today, and this has gone on in India already, this temple representing Vrindavan, gloriously cleaned. Okay, we have a schedule here, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Thank you, Ananda Krishna. 2 a.m. wake up, begins chanting japa, meditation, studies Srimad Bhagavatam and other scriptures, writes devotional books, songs, essays, translations. 2 a.m. bath and morning duties. 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. full government work day. That's a full day, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. 5 p.m. returns home, takes prasad, meets with family and visitors. 7 to 9, writing and study. 9:30 or 10, retires for the night. So yeah, about 4 hours every night, and then waking again at 2 a.m. Oh my goodness. And Srila Prabhupada, right, Swami Maharaj, he had a similar schedule, I believe. But this is different because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was living a double life in a sense, because that's a full-time job. 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then he's also taking care of his family. I mean, my goodness. Anyhow, so today this has already gone on in India, preparing and cleaning this temple. And traditionally in all of our temples around the world, it's a day to clean the Lord's house. And then tomorrow is Ratha Yatra, when the Lord is invited and he is brought to that temple. But I guess we'll stop there. Gangalila has her hand raised. Love to
Yeah,
hear.
along those lines, if it's okay to share like a mini story.
Yeah, please.
So I can move around much better in my body. So I took on the last 2 days to clean, because it was not happening so much, because I had to recover from whatever I needed to recover from. So now I'm all strong and I'm like, whoa, and I'm like vacuum, and I'm just really cleaning house big time yesterday, today. And then I was looking for an item on Facebook Marketplace, which is often some very highly neighborhood-oriented, free, low-cost stuff. And then it's out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, go-pee skirts. I'm like, no, like we're not going to buy like happy colored skirt, because that's it's a distraction easily. But then I answered, it's like, is it medium size? Are they cotton? And they're like super cheap and very nearby. And then I was like, I'm not reacting. I'm not doing that. I'm just going to focus on my house. And then I said, oh, and then because she used the word gopi skirt. So I said Hare Krishna. And I was telling myself, okay, absolutely not reacting when there's no reaction on Hare Krishna. And I will actually go out there. And then she sends hearts, Hare Krishna. So I'm like, oh, what's your address? So I'm going. And I'm like, I don't even know. But then I said, like, for some reason, I'm really called here. She's moving. She puts all these skirts on the lawn. I'm like, oh, no. And I take one, the other, and I'm like, oh, I don't even know. And then she just looks at me for a moment. She said, yeah, it's a move. We're moving. We're leaving. And then she just looks at me again and she said, you know what? Just take them all. I'm like, that's like 10 items of like really pretty, nice, my size, cotton, pretty things from India. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, you can even share with others. I'm like, thank you very much. She said, and then she went and said she has a second set of Srimad Bhagavatam if I want that. And I said, yes. So I clean the house. And then yesterday in the box, and I was in Madhusudan Maharaj's class. I'm like, oh my God, what should I do? And he's like, oh, just light some incense. And I'm like, oh, can I sage? And he's like, what is sage? I said, okay, that is sage. And he said, yes. So while I'm in that sadhusanga yesterday, I had the Srimad Bhagavatam move in. So I thought that was a very good timing, right?
Wow, that's a pretty amazing story.
Right? Because I was like,
Delivery of Bhagavatam on Bhaktivinoda Thakur's day. That sounds like some special mercy from Bhaktivinoda Thakur.
do you see
Look
it
at
there?
that.
I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
so excited. I'm like, whoa. And it's new. It was two devotees, and then they married, and they don't need two sets. So I feel very blessed, and and that's I wanted to share that because I'm like, wow, what a timing. And I know that these appearance and disappearance days are also not like the date. Today is 26th of June. It's always like a moon phase, isn't it, Vishaka Didi?
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So that's why I made myself, I'm like, no, I need to really, clean. And I didn't really knew so much that was actually a thing to do. But Hare Krishna, thanks for letting me share that. Jai Gurudev.
Thank you for sharing. That's beautiful. And yes, it's a nice day to clean. We may not be in a temple, but no doubt you have some temple space. And even just to be in that activity of cleaning, there's something purifying about it. We can remember, we can meditate on that, right? We're cleaning our heart. Right? We're cleaning our heart, and there's something very purifying about it. So it's a day for that. And does anyone else want to share something about Bhaktivinoda Thakur or one of these holy days or anything else related? Should we close there and welcome? There are a few of you who came in a bit later. Anna is with us from Portugal. I know it might be hard for you to understand everything, but you're so patient in joining and happily participating.
Okay. Thank you.
And Somya, Sham, and Vijay, they have their evening program actually. They've joined.
Cleaning program.
Dandavas Pashakadidi, yeah,
Dandavad.
some good.
Good nature cleaning going on.
Since 2 o'clock today, so there's been so many people, devotees here.
Oh,
cleaning, so
really?
yeah,
Nandini Didi was there.
Krishna and Dini came at 2 o'clock, and then
Oh.
Denise has been here. Indrani, Ramadas Prabhu, and Jadagopal is
Cooking.
he's cooking prashadam tonight. So there's been a lot of activity, a lot of
Oh,
cleaning
Jai.
out, and
Everybody's participating.
Yeah. so everything is turned upside down in a good way.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Very nice to hear.
So so we're trying to get ready for the program as well.
Okay, Jai, Jai.
But so we're listening to your program in the background there. So it's very beautiful talk and remembrance of from Śrīla Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur. So
And we were
appreciate
saying as
that.
well of you had a call on Gundicha margin, and on Jagannath Yath Yatra 2 years back in London, found the recording on. You had it for London, in the London temple. You had it, so we played that during the cleaning as well.
Okay. Okay. Well, there we go.
Sure.
Live Gundicha Marjan at our temple in Ireland.
Denise? Yeah. Hare Krishna.
Oh, Denise, Haribol.
Thank you.
And Indrani and Ramadas are there as well. They're doing some, I don't know who else is there. Jadagopala is there as well. He's gone out. So yeah, anyway, they're all there.
Okay.
Oh,
Very
making
nice.
garlands. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Dandavad Vishakadi.
Dandavat. Okay. Well, should we close there for today? And we'll reconvene next Thursday, same time, same place. We have more shares in our chat from Marie Tungarasa. Mahaprabhu, happy to have you with us. Okay, looks like a happy day of cleaning for everyone. And yeah, we didn't have time, but that chapter in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's maybe like around chapter 13 of the Madhya Lila. You can find it on Vedabase. It's an ecstatic chapter, so beautiful, so beautiful. It gives a very elaborate description of how Mahaprabhu personally is cleaning and leading all of his associates, and sometimes he's crying tears of ecstasy as he's cleaning. Then he's cleaning with his tears. I mean, it's so beautiful. Beautiful meditation. Okay. Okay, Marie's read it, it sounds like. Oh, very nice. Jai Śrīla Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai, Śrīla Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai, Śrīla Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur ki Jai, Śrī Gadadhar Pandit ki Jai, Śrī Gundicha Marjan ki Jai, Śrī Jagannath Rath Yatra Adivas Titi ki Jai, all the assembled devotees, sincere seekers ki Jai. My sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for your affection, your presence, and your regard for our Guru's teachings, through all of yourselves and all of ourselves. We all have the privilege of being able to continue the legacy of Bhaktivinod Ṭhākur, right? It's a great privilege. It's a great privilege. I had a nice talk a few days ago, or actually it was a couple of weeks ago now, at Suvasini's house with my good friend Isha Bandhu in Australia. Gadadhar Pandit was there, and I like something Isha Bandhu said. He said to Gadadhar, "You're honoring the privilege, right? By our trying to continue in our practice and prayer and meditation on these teachings, we're honoring the privilege that we've all been granted. It is a great privilege that we can know about such things, that we can know such persons, right? It is a privilege, and by continuing their discussion, remembering their glories and sharing a little bit of that according to our ability, we're honoring that privilege that we all have, So I'm very grateful that with all of yourselves, we've created a space here where we can honor that together. Okay, well, wishing you all a happy, nourishing week ahead, and look forward to next time. Haribol!